Welcome, fellow Stardust. Are you ready for a scare? I see you've come back for more. If you're new here, buckle up. And thank you for joining me today. My name is DeRay, aka Rainbow Fright. And for today's video, I'll be discussing 5 facts about the making of horror gore Baskin. This film was requested by subscriber Sibby Thampi, who I give many thanks for their submission. The review will be available tomorrow at noon Central Time. For now, let's get into some trivia. Viewer discretion is advised. Baskin, a Turkish film directed by Can Evrenol, follows 5 police officers who are sent on a call to an abandoned building and find themselves in purgatory. Our focus is on Arda, a new police officer who we saw have the nightmare at the start of the film. This Lovecraftian horror story depicts a certain type of hell so perfectly. Whether this is your cup of tea or not, what was accomplished was spectacular. With this film, we got the best of both worlds. A little bit of art house and a little bit of Hollywood. And on such a low budget, the dreamy surreal atmosphere mixed with the very tangible moments in reality made for one wild ride. 5. The father was the actor's first role. Mehmet plays Baba, or the father, who we mostly see in the third act. Though he is shorter than average, his presence on film is tremendous. Let's go back several years and take a look at the events that led him to the role of the father. In Turkey, Mehmet was having a hard time finding work, so he sought the help of his town's mayor. Mehmet told him that he was in good physical health and intelligent, but nobody would hire him simply because of the way he looked. Mehmet was born with a rare skin disorder, giving him a very unique look. The mayor was sympathetic to his story and decided that he would take this man to the press and get him some publicity in the hopes that it would generate better luck for him. And this actually worked. After getting in the papers and being involved in different publicized interviews, Mehmet ended up getting married and was given a job at a car park. The experience gave him confidence and the ability to face the world head on. With his newfound self-worth, he decided to submit his headshot to casting agencies in hopes that filmmakers would be looking for a unique face. Can Evrenol's casting director showed a photo of Mehmet and 4 other actors, and Can knew as soon as he saw Mehmet that he wanted to use him for his short film, Baskin. In the 11-minute short, the father character doesn't exist, so Mehmet was merely an extra. But when it came time to write the feature-length film, Can knew he wanted Mehmet to play the role of father, so he wrote the entire script with him in mind. After completing the script and showing it to Mehmet, he feared that he wouldn't want to be a part of something so vile. But luckily for him, he was wrong. After being offered the role, Mehmet drew some sketches of the scenes that looked a lot like the scenes from the film. But Can explains that the drawings didn't influence the production of the film, but rather Mehmet was just that detail-oriented and had such a handle on the character that the drawings just happened to match what the final product looked like. With having a big interest in cultism and cult leaders, Can said he based his cult leader figure around personalities like mass murderer Jim Jones, Pinhead, and Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now. 4. Baskin is the first Turkish horror film to be released in America. Along with being the first Turkish horror film to be released in the United States, it's also one of a handful of movies to be exported to the United States. And in fact, it is currently illegal to watch the film in Turkey. Turkish films are known to be low budget and nothing to write home about. Can explains that when one wanted to insult a film from anywhere, people would call it a Turkish film. The phrase was synonymous for bad film. But in recent years, Turkish films have been evolving and have better production quality. Can has paved the way for fellow Turkish filmmakers in attacking taboo topics. For instance, up until around the 90s, it was illegal to show police in a negative light. But with Baskin, in 2015, John did just that. There was also a lot of nudity in the film, so much so that John was worried he would get shut down at any moment if authorities saw what was going on. Since the film's release, John has gotten thank you letters and special thanks credits in short films of filmmakers who were trying to follow in his footsteps. He pioneered the way for other Turkish filmmakers and has set a new standard for those who also want to push boundaries just a little bit. And not for the sake of pushing boundaries, but for the sake of creating art without limitations. 3. Eli Roth's involvement. Baskin, the short film, screened at Sitges, one of the world's largest film festivals that specializes in horror and fantasy films, located in Sitges, Spain. The short film caught the eye of Eli Roth, who asked John if he had a feature-length script written out. John lied and said yes. After that meeting and being completely taken aback by Eli's interest in the film, John wrote a script with his team in about a week. He later had lunch with Eli, who would eventually fall silent. But all wasn't lost because Eli's interest stirred up interest with other big players in the filmmaking industry. Which brings me to my next point. 2. John was a TV commercial director in Istanbul. XYZ Films was very interested in John for several years because of his previous short films and work on TV commercials. So when the short was recognized as something special, they told John if he made the feature-length film that they would find a buyer. The film had a micro budget of $300,000, which was funded by John's family, most notably his mother, an architect, who put in half of her life savings into the project. The film looks much more expensive than that because he was able to pay the crew really low rates. His incredibly talented cast and crew had worked with him before on the TV commercials and wanted to help him realize his vision, so they all agreed to a lower than normal pay rate. With the green light to make the film, pre-production began, and that took 30 days. Production was 28 nights with no daytime shoots, and 2 months went to post-production. So this was a fast turnaround from day one to the film being in the can, about 4.5 months. At times, it was a very difficult shoot. I mentioned before that John worried that they would be shut down by authorities at any moment because the permits they had were not solid. They had people who were naked or with very little clothing in some of the most conservative parts of town. It was also very cold during the entire shoot, so the actors, especially the cult followers, had to endure some pretty harsh conditions. The interior shots were in catacombs, which didn't provide much protection from the elements. Also, the underwater scene took half of one night, and it's only about a minute long. But it was totally worth it. The film ended up screening at 45 film festivals around the world. After it premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival, other festivals asked to screen it. He didn't have to fuss with application paperwork or acceptance into the festivals. He won Best New Director at Fantastic Fest in Austin, Texas, and the Director's Award at Mórbido Fest. And then XYZ Films eventually sold it to IFC Midnight. And 1. Arda's dream is a true story. At the start of the film, we see a young Arda who hears noises coming from his mother's room and also sees the arm of a boogeyman. Before we can see what happens next, we cut to an adult Arda eating at a restaurant with his colleagues. Later in the film, we return to this same restaurant, but this time, it's just Arda and the boss, Remzi. Arda tells Remzi about the recurring dream he's been having his entire life. Arda starts by telling Remzi that when he was a child, his friend Koskun watched his father die and then saw his soul leave his body. So Arda and Koskun promised each other that if one should die, that they would appear to the other without scaring them. After making that promise, Koskun got on a ferry and the boys went their separate ways. That night, Arda had a dream in which people were staring at him, and he had a deep, unknown fear of Koskun emerging from the crowd. Sure enough, Koskun does and walks over to him, holds his hand, and says, "Don't be afraid, Arda. It's me, Koskun." Then Arda wakes up, and he's in another dream, the dream sequence we see at the beginning of the film with the boogeyman. He then wakes up from that dream, and that same day, he and his mother got a call that Kuskun had been hit by a car that night. John says that the first part of Arda's story happened to his father. John's father had always been afraid of dreams in a way. As a kid, John's father and his friend had a, quote, heart-to-heart conversation and said that if one of them dies, they would speak to the other without scaring them. Years later, John's father had a dream where there is a crowd and he feels a fear that he can't quite explain. And then he soon sees his friend come from the crowd, who shakes his hand and says, "It's me, your friend. There's nothing to be afraid of." Then when his father wakes up, he gets news that his friend had been run over by a boat while scuba diving. This either intensified John's father's fear of dreams or started it. John said they weren't allowed to talk about their dreams at night when he was growing up. That rule probably still stands in that household. Because of his father's fear of dreams and the effect it had on John, this became the core of many of his films. He now also has a fascination with dreams. And with being a relatively new horror fan, he is able to mesh the two together for a super surreal experience. Things like Nightmare on Elm Street, David Cronenberg, John Carpenter, and The Twilight Zone were all inspirations when developing Baskin. Well, there you have it. 5 facts on this nightmarish horror story. If you want more of my thoughts on this film, check back tomorrow for my review. I upload every Thursday and Friday, so hop on the Rainbow Fright Freight Train and hit that subscribe button so you can be notified. I hope I see you next time, fellow Stardust. Peace.